This morning on Media and Society, we talk investigative reporting. Reporters that have been at the helm of some of the major stories that have broken in the country over the last few years. Well, today we discuss the work that they do and the challenges that they face in the job. Well, hello and welcome to Media and Society. I am your host, Nalindi Moleo. Of course, this is the show where we take a look at the intersection between the media and society. This show, of course, is not complete without your input, so be sure to give us a call over the next hour. That number is 011-714-0661 or 0662. We're on Twitter as well. Get in touch with us using the handle at SABC_MNS. And we're talking investigative journalism and the work that is done by them. Well, so investigative journalism really is critical in promoting accountability and transparency in institutions and ultimately in maintaining a really healthy democracy. It is through investigative journalism that journalists can uncover information that powerful institutions may seek to hide or suppress from the public. And this information can include corruption, fraud, abuse of power and other forms of wrongdoing that have the potential to really undermine public trust and confidence in those in positions of authority. It was investigative journalists who brought to the fore the devastation of state capture. Remember that. The VBS scandal as well was sniffed out by investigative journalism. And this time around, they even beat the police and authorities in answering questions and exposing Thabo Beste's audacious prison escape. And this is just a recent example of where many investigative reporters really shine a light where many fear to tread. And by shining a light on these issues, these are journalists that provide an essential service to society, holding those in power accountable for their actions and also really promoting transparency. So we're going to have a conversation today with a few investigative journalists about the work that they've done and how it has led to authorities really going back to investigate themselves the work that has been done by investigative journalists. We are joined by a few guests. We're going to be speaking to, via Zoom, investigative journalist with News 24, Azara Karim. Azara, good morning to you. Welcome to to Media and Society.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, good stuff to have you. Good to have you as well. We are also joined by Abdulateef Jos, who is editor-in-chief at Frydab's Solace-Based Communications in Nigeria. Abdulateef, good morning to you, and thank you so much for joining the South African audiences.
Thank you very much. Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Really good to have you with us. And in studio, we are joined by Mr. Nkulego Sbia, who is a teaching fellow and PhD candidate at Wits University. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thanks for
Good
joining.
morning. Good morning.
It's really good to have you. I want to start with you because we are in studio together. I think that as someone who is sitting in academia, and you obviously have quite a bird's eye view over the work that's done by investigative journalists, not just in South Africa, but even on the continent, which is the stories that we'll hear from people like Abdulateef. Prominent moments that stand out for you on what we've seen investigative journalism really be able to do in a democratic and even pre-democratic South Africa?
Mendy Rousseau is the first one that comes to mind. Nkandla Gate was big.
Of course.
If we look at, ESCOM, if we look at, Akwel, in KZN, those stories for me, highlight the fact that, investigative journalism is not just looking at government, it's also looking at big business. If we look at Bain and Company, for instance, and all of those are examples of great investigative journalism in our country. And those, for me, I can put out there and say, we need to use as examples to really get into the impact of investigative journalism in the country.
100%. And I think one of the standout moments for me that I think of is the Gupta leaks, for instance, right? I mean, that was an explosive piece of investigative journalism that we saw here in South Africa. And then you look at some of the examples, and I mentioned earlier, the investigative journalism work that was done by Ground Up in uncovering the Thabo Beste prison escape. Azara, I want to come to you, and I know that you've done a lot of investigative journalism yourself, but before we get into some of your own work, some of the standout moments for you in terms of the work that has been done by investigative journalists in South Africa.
Well, when I was in high school, I think the Gupta leaks first came out. I think I was just finishing matric at the time, and that obviously really stood out for me because at the time it was, this young girl looking at all these amazing journalists really start to change the course of the country. So to me, those journalists really look like superheroes. And so obviously the Gupta leaks. But then VBS, and I think that stands out for me because of the abuse that Paulie van Wyk had to endure by exposing the truth. And then Tembisa, I think my colleague Jeff Wicks has done a phenomenal job on Babita Deokaran and the billions that she exposed at tried to expose at Tembisa Hospital, and I think that is a journalist's dream to have that sort of impact with your investigations.
Yeah, Mr. Just, I'm going to come to you, and hopefully you'll give us some really good stories as well about explosive finds by investigative journalists in Nigeria.
Thank you very much for having me on once again. You see, when we look at the issue of investigative journalism, not embarking on investigation is just like doing a PR, that is a public relations. So in this situation, some of the work in which we have done in Nigeria is we're trying to even focus much on the subnationals, because you find a situation whereby most journalists focus more on the federal system, not looking at those at the state level. And when you look at the issue of corruption, and we're talking about accountability, we need to take very good cognizance of those at the state level, because in Nigeria, most state governors are even more powerful as a result of what the Constitution has bestowed upon them. Then apart from that, when you look at the perspective of our lawmakers, from the federal lawmakers, we have what we call constituency project. Constituency project is a situation whereby a lawmaker will sponsor a project in his constituency, and the project will be awarded to a contractor for the contractor to carry out the project for the benefit of the people. But on most occasions, the contractors are either the legislators themselves, or they will connive with the legislators to do schedule, or to connive with the contractors to shortchange the people. You understand?
I understand. So you're talking about
the people.
Yes, so I want you to finish that thought, because essentially you're talking about, I want you to finish that thought, but essentially what you're talking about is the corrupt link that you're starting to see between government service providers and government officials themselves. And we've got similar challenges here in South Africa. But talk to me about examples where we've seen investigative journalists really unearth some of those stories in Nigeria.
A particular example was a story that Solis Base did in Benue State. Benue State is one of the 36 states we have in Nigeria, and is in the north central of the country. A House of Representative member from that state got a constituency project of building primary health care for 2 communities, that is 2 local government areas. But incidentally, one of the local government areas got the construction, and instead of the lawmaker to do the same thing, to replicate it in the second local government, he then commenced circulating the pictures of the one that he has done as the 2 local government that he has carried out. Incidentally, it was one primary health care that was constructed, but it was creating the impression that 2 primary health care have been constructed and the money have been paid. Where is the money? Why are the people going through this? So that was what we heard in Benue State. That was last year. And as a result of a report in which we came out with, in the first instance, he threatened us with a lawsuit. He wrote to us. There were verbal threats and what have you. Subsequently, when they realized that we weren't budging, they went back to the drawing board, and the primary health care was completed.
Sure.
Which was as a result of the effort of that story.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. We've also got one of our own investigative journalists joining us on the line, Uspiwe Linda, who is with the SABC. And you might remember him from uncovering the story of Inkabi in KZN. Uspiwe, good morning to you. Welcome to Media and Society.
Good morning to you and the viewers.
I think let's go back to that story that you did, particularly around hitmen in KZN. I mean, that was a big explosive one. We knew that these networks of hitmen existed in KZN. But when you started to bring it to us, to really look at these stories, when you spoke to the hitmen themselves, it made it all the more real for South Africans. Talk to me about going back to that story, how you went about doing that. And I can imagine that was a terrifying project to work on.
Yeah, no, it was a terrifying project as well. For sure. So the story, the brief was we need to do political killings, which we had the case studies, people who were attacked and survived. But now we then thought we need a person who is the one involved in killing these people to tell us how do they go about, who is hiring them. Then now the mission was to find a hitman for sure who gets to be hired by whoever to go kill these politicians. And that's how we went about getting this guy. It wasn't easy. Was given a contact by someone who knows a hitman. So to get to the hitman and to make him trust me, you know, it was a mission. So basically, he agreed after I introduced myself. I think it took me about 2 days to introduce myself to the guy. He agreed to meet. We were initially supposed to meet during the day, but he kept on postponing, and we ended up meeting at night, you know, only to find out. And the area where we got to meet, it was in a field. It was at night, scary, it's dark, you know. And now I had to call this guy and say, "Look, I'm here, so I can't see you." And now he said, "No, I can see you." You know, he doesn't know me, he doesn't know the car that I'm driving, but he's claiming that he sees me. Let me just stop there. He will come to me. I had to take that risk. I had a choice to go back because I don't know what's going to happen to us. It was me and the video journalist, and just to you know, take that risk and meet the guy. And yeah, he came to us, and that's it. We had to now grill him, and he was okay with all the questions that we posed to him. He gave us all the modus operandi as to how do they prepare, how much does it cost them, you know, to kill these people, and yeah, also who how easy it is for accessing them by these people who kill politicians.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, goodness. I'm thinking about just the bravery that it takes to run a story like that. And of course, there were so many elements about it as well, Spiwe, where it wasn't just for you interviewing the hitmen as well. It was about speaking to traditional healers who apparently strengthen these hitmen. And we'll get back to the various elements of that story. But Azara, I want to bring you in here and talk about some of the work that you've done as well. I know that you've recently worked on the anniversary of the July unrest. I mean, talk to me about how you went about working on that project, what that felt like, what that looked like, the work that goes into, you know, going back to an unrest that basically almost crippled the country 2 years ago.
Yeah, it was about 2 weeks in KZN and 2 weeks here in Joburg, just speaking to families who lost loved ones during the July unrest and what happened to their cases, the police cases that they laid 1 year after it happened. It wasn't difficult to talk to these families because they want to talk, they want their voices to be heard, and they want something to be done, and they believe that the media can do that for them. So it wasn't too difficult to get them to speak or to get them to, refer us to other families who might have lost loved ones. But the heartbreak was very intense. And I mean, these people, the wounds are raw, and it feels like it will never heal until the police can, bring the people who killed their loved ones to justice. And I think the most heartbreaking was what happened in Phoenix and surrounding Phoenix during the July unrests. And those cases never went anywhere one year later. So it was an attempt to hold the police to account, and an attempt to sort of light a fire for them to do something. Because it seems like South Africa was ravaged by riots, and then it was sort of just left there.
Yeah, I mean, there's also a lot of work going into it. Abdulateef, I want to come back to you because you were talking to us about investigations that you'd been running, looking particularly at the health system and corruption in health facility constructions in Nigeria. What's the work that goes into that? I mean, what does it look like where you need to start finding the sources and getting people to trust you? Spiwe talked about needing to interview a hitman and being terrified for his own life just to be able to access information. What's the difficulty that you've had in being able to really source information to get to the story?
See, basically, when we start most of this work, the community are mostly very willing to cooperate and give information. But in some instances, by the time that the person being investigated, who on most occasions are very top government officials and very rich, it sort of poses a lot of danger because they compel their lieutenants, I mean their foot soldiers, to even attack some of our reporters that goes on the field in some instances, because there are instances whereby we go out to look at the job being done itself, the quality of the job, and if the job is really being done. A particular case in hand was the one we did in Yobe State. Yobe State happens to be in the northeastern part of Nigeria that has been ravaged by insurgency for a very long time. And the Senate president of Nigeria, that is the third man in Nigeria, the Senate president comes from that area. There was a project that he did during the COVID period, worth about $1.5 million. That is the provision of water for the community. Incidentally, the job was not done and money was paid. And when we set out to find out what the situation was, the community have to travel, the people in the community have to travel kilometers to access potable water. So a provision was made for water, potable water, to be in that community of about $1.5 million. The work was not done. We did our story about that area. The people were willing to talk to us because they felt that they've suffered a lot. But when we do stories like this, what we mostly do again is we do follow-up stories. Apart from the first one in which we have done to find out, we've uncovered the situation, we do follow-up stories to ensure that at least let this thing be done, or what are the people feeling about it at the same time. When we went back for a follow-up, our men were attacked because they realized that we were exposing them. Apart from that, they wrote letters to us. They threaten us, and on most occasion, the threat even come from some of the community leaders. Because do you know what happened again? Yes. Some of the community leaders that have spoken, some of the people that have spoken to us in the first instance, mostly renege, because the political leaders will have gone back to threaten them, and for them to now deny that, sorry, we didn't speak to you.
Yeah, there's a lot there, and
You
I think
understand?
I understand, and I think we need to talk a little bit about safety when we come back, and we'll bring it to the studio as well. About what do we do about the work that investigative journalists do, and also the danger that they face. We've seen it here in South Africa, and you hear Mr. Joss in Nigeria talking about it as well. Death threats that are faced by investigative journalists, even on social media, even by the public, and not necessarily those big political figures. What do we do about that? And we're going to talk a little bit more as well about the relationship between investigative journalists and authorities. We'll take a short break. We're back in a moment. Welcome back. So we continue our conversation around the work done by investigative journalists. It can, of course, be very dangerous and difficult, with many challenges and obstacles faced by those who choose to pursue some of the more tough stories and investigations. On the primary challenges of investigative journalism, of course, there's also a lack of resources, with many organizations facing budget cuts and even staff reductions to limit their ability to conduct in-depth investigations. But we're going to talk a little bit about the legal threats and even the threats to their lives that are faced by investigative journalists. We continue with our guests, but we're taking calls as well. 0117140661. Spiwa's on the line. Spiwa, thanks for calling in.
Yes, how are you, Mama?
I'm well. What are your thoughts?
Yes, my name is Sintu. I'm from Freedom Park, south of Joburg in Mountain View. What I want to say today, government must protect the investigative journalists. You know, you can see most what is happening in the gold mafia scandal. Understand? So people can get killed here. You understand? So it's a very, very dangerous job. It's like being a corruption buster. When you expose corruption, understand, you die in the process. The government doesn't do anything to protect those people.
Yeah,
Yes,
I mean,
that is
that's a very fair point that you've made there, Spiwa. Thank you so much for calling in. We'll take more calls on 0117140661. I want to bring it back to you and say, let's talk about safety, right? What are we doing wrong there? Spiwa mentions gold mafia, and I'm thinking, when I watched it, I thought those are some brave, brave journalists.
You know, we really have to think about where did this type of journalism come from. If we look 18th century, the work of William Stead, you know, it's really a work that is informed by spirituality, looking at the man, you know, the word of God. It's very important to be the voice of the poor, you know, the voiceless, you know, the downtrodden. What happens is that you find that at the higher echelons of our society, government, whether it's business, you then start having, you know, these relationships that force security systems to fail, for instance, right? We saw what happened with our state security institutions, for instance. You know, it becomes very easy to kill people. Right now we have the Senzo Meyiwa case, for instance, many other cases that are not being solved. What our problem is that if you look at the gold mafia, for instance, is that you have a government. Investigative journalism can go unearth all of these hidden secrets and stuff. However, if you've got authorities that are not going to do anything or play their part, then we have a problem. You know, Babita Diop-Karan, for instance, it's scary that even to this day, we don't know who actually committed, you know what I'm saying? We also are sitting with a situation where the Gauteng health government did not just suspended the two, the financial officer and the CEO. No charges were brought, and then you get to a point where, you know, we are sitting with, they are going back to work. What happens? So journalists can only do so much. They put their lives in danger. And another thing, if you think of the likes of Henry Nxumalo, for instance, Henry Nxumalo had to get himself arrested, you know, to show the atrocious conditions that black people were being subjected to right here, which is now the Constitutional Hill Prison Museum. You know, he also got trapped in potato farms. You know, he had to go out there and put his body on the line. So all these men and women who take up this role or this type of journalism, we have to understand that it's not just a job. I think sometimes we also do this in academia where we criticize the journalists too much and forget that they actually also put their bodies on the line. You know, so really the authorities, it's also it has to come with ethics. We need to build an ethical society, a society that feels, so that if a journalist puts their body on the line, we are also able to have a person in authority, a police officer, an investigator who's going to also put their body on the line.
Yeah.
And also we need the political sector to come in. If you look at the criminal justice system in the country as well, people wonder why people, are able to escape being prosecuted for their crimes. Dockets get lost. We're still using paper systems, all of that type of stuff. So it is a combination of role players. But I think the role of the investigative journalist is very important because, if we allow the killing of these people, it takes years to train them.
Yeah.
It takes years. You don't just wake up
It's a very particular
from
skill.
journalism
Yes.
school or media studies at Wits, and then you come out and you are a investigative journalist. It takes years. It's a craft. It's a type of research. It's a type of work that requires you to poke at people's faces, unearth their secrets. And when you do that with very powerful people, you are then stepping on toes.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done there, not just to protect them, but also for an appreciation, really, of the work done by investigative journalists. We're taking your calls. Ronika's on the line in Tembisa, I think. Ronika, good morning.
Good morning, Naledi. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for calling. What are your thoughts?
My comment, Naledi, is about the investigative journalists and the whistleblowers. They are doing their job right. But what about the law enforcement of South Africa? Are they being protected, or they're just doing that and move on?
Yeah,
That's
I mean,
my worry, because
yeah.
Most of them that are doing the job, they are busting a lot of cases where the law enforcement can't reach.
Yeah, and so this is the point that we just raised as well here in studio. And thank you so much for calling, Ronika. Piwe Linda, I'm going to bring you back in here because when you did the story around the hitman and Inkabi in KZN, one would hope that as a result of that, there would be law enforcement then stepping in and going into some sort of investigation. And I know that after you did that story, you actually faced quite a bit of criticism, Piwe, because you were then in a position where you had to protect your sources. But there's still the work that needs to be done, hopefully, by law enforcement to at least follow up on the breadcrumbs that you were able to uncover.
Yeah. We need to protect our sources. If we don't, then we're not going to be able to do stories anymore. We come to an agreement, they are saying, we risk our lives. We go there with no protection, and we come to an agreement. And someone to come with such an exclusive ways of how do they kill people, and promise this guy with, I'm not gonna reveal who you are, and the purpose of this is to inform our society, like you said in the beginning, that we knew that they are hitmen and they're doing this job, but we really did not know what is it that they get into up until someone dies. And to bring that to our audience, it took me I don't know, it took me alive. So basically now when someone says I need to then give this guy to the police myself, number one, I'm risking because I'm going to be a target. Number two, I'm becoming unethical to the investigative journalism industry. The police needs to do their job. They need to find this person was speaking on behalf of all the hitmen out there. He's not the only one. The police can be trusted, and they arrest these people. And the other thing is the prosecution. These people need to be prosecuted, and they need to be taken behind bars. So if that we can see a success of police doing their job, then it will be easy. Maybe, I don't know, for us also, if you get subpoenaed or
Yeah.
then.
Yeah, there's a lot there because there's quite a tight rope that you have to walk then as an investigative journalist. But I want to bring in someone else here. We're joined now by Mr. Benin Oluka, who is an investigative journalist speaking to us from Uganda. He, of course, is the Africa editor for the Global Investigative Journalism Network. Benin, good morning to you. Welcome to Media and Society.
Yeah, good morning to you all, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, the room is getting bigger. So I want to quickly just bring you into the discussion and say, Benin, talk to us a little bit about investigative journalism, particularly in Uganda. Standout moments for you. We've already shifted the conversation to how authorities respond to investigations by journalists. What are some of those examples that you can think of? Really big explosive ones for you in Uganda.
Yes, they've been, so Ugandan investigative journalists try to do the best investigation that they can, and a good number of them have had impact. I have personally investigated a story of the Ugandan military, which is serving in Somalia as part of the African Union mission in Somalia. And at the time, they were selling, some officers of the Uganda People's Defense Forces were selling slots. So when they were asked to bring in fighters, they would ask the fighters to pay certain amounts of money so that they could get a slot, because, and these slots are lucrative because they are paid about, almost 10 times what they are paid in Uganda. And so everybody was trying to do that, but you can imagine a situation where you're actually getting people to pay money to put themselves in harm's way. And in some of the cases, especially female fighters were being sexually abused, And so when I did that investigation, initially the Ugandan military denied that it was happening, but thankfully they promised that they would do their own internal investigation. Once they did that, their internal investigation, they found that it was happening, and about 3 or 4 months later, they suspended some of the officers and court-martialed them. So I think authorities, those in positions of authority who mean well and want to see things operate as well, should actually see journalists as allies, because there's some information that journalists, because of the skills in digging up that information, they are privileged to have, which even those in positions of authority do not get access to. So once we reveal this information, they should, if they're meaning well, see journalists as allies who can help them clean up the management of public affairs in their respective institutions.
It's interesting when you use the words that authorities should think of journalists as allies, and I immediately think of, some studies that have been done around trust levels that South Africans, particularly here at home, have in the media. The trust level's quite high, especially when you compare to what they look like in trust levels for government institutions. Azara, I want to bring you in here. I mean, how do we get that right, where law enforcement authorities start to see investigative journalists as allies? What does that relationship look like? Is it working? I mean, in some instances, one could argue that, where Amapongane brought us the Gupta leaks, for instance, we did end up with a state capture commission, and that link has been made. But how do we keep that thread going? How does that alliance need to look?
It's obviously one that both sides of the coin need to bring their own sort of expertise and efforts into. I think, first of all, the media needs to, or journalists perhaps, on the one hand, need to report responsibly, and then on the other hand, law enforcement needs to trust the media and take us into their confidence as much as they can, obviously, because they're also balancing between sort of revealing information, but not too much where we could potentially tip off the crooks or make people aware of investigations going on so that they, might destroy documents. So it's a learning process for both of both of us. But I think there needs to be trust on both sides, and that trust is built over a long period of time. The main thing about investigative journalists is cultivating sources and contacts and trusting and the trust between those contacts, and same with law enforcement. But we must understand that law enforcement is understaffed, under-resourced, and in many cases underskilled. But we cannot do their job for them. That isn't our responsibility. Our responsibility is to expose the truth, and we must remember that. But it's obviously a relationship where both sides need to put in effort, and perhaps journalists need to be taught how to report responsibly on certain matters.
The standout for me, what you said there, Azara. Law enforcement needs to do their job. Investigative journalists can't and shouldn't do their job for them. We're taking calls 0117140661. Sandile's on the line in Cape Town. Sandile, good morning. Thanks for calling.
Morning, ma'am. Thanks for taking my call.
Of course.
My position will be to recommend and say the investigation journalists, they are doing a very good job in the access or the collapse of the law enforcement in Africa continent as a whole. Looking at the past 10 years in South Africa, under the state capture, we've been relying to investigation journalists to expose those authorities who are corrupt. One of the major problems is that making them to face the danger that those who are in power in the law enforcement are also colluded with these criminals. Now it makes for them very dangerous, but as a society we appreciate their role they play to keep us informed.
Absolutely. Sandile, thank you so much. And the important work they do is bringing to light what is being hidden in the dark. Abdul Latif, can I bring you in here? Because there's something to be said about being organized as investigative journalists so that there is that sense of support and leaning on each other. Because we've talked about the dangers to your life and how, Nkululeko was talked earlier about how journalists put their bodies on the line. You put your lives at risk when you pursue some of these stories. So there really needs to be a sense of being organized. And I know that Abdul Latif and Ben, in December, you were all here in South Africa at the Investigative Journalism Conferences. Talk a little bit about the need for those kind of collaborations and support networks.
Thank you very much. You see, when you even look at it, you look at it as a situation of like a double-edged sword. What do I mean by a double-edged sword? In the first instance, you look at the fact that it's expensive to even embark on investigative journalism. Because sourcing materials, traveling and what have you. Then number two, when you look at the aspect of the security, it's mostly very dangerous because apart from the fact that the person being investigated or the organization being investigated, they are mostly well-to-do. So they can embark on, if I look at it from the perspective of Nigeria, that they can just come up with a frivolous lawsuits that they are able and capable of paying. But you, as a journalist, you find it difficult in some instances to go on with the cases. So in this situation, one of the good things that we are enjoying a bit in Nigeria now is that we have organizations that even support journalists in terms of collaboration to carry out the law cases. You understand? Because carrying out an investigation, it costs you as much as almost about $2,000 in some instances for just a single report because of the travel, because of the documentations that you're expected to go, and in some instances you have to go undercover. So by the time you are through with all this, you now look at the expenses, and the person being investigated even now come up with a frivolous lawsuit. And when we look at the judicial system in Nigeria, it's not helping issue because it's foot dragging. Then you now look at the resources to spend on that. But luckily, we have collaboration with organizations like there's this organization we call Media Right Agenda in Nigeria. Media Right Agenda collaborate with journalists to protect in terms of giving succor to going to court and what have you. Then we have this collaboration also. We have this collaboration also with other sister organizations, whereby there are some investigations that we do together.
Much like what we saw with the Pala Pala Gate saga, where we saw collaborations between, journalists in Namibia as well as here in South Africa, uncovering that story. Let's talk a little bit about what we need to be doing then to develop resources, right? Azara, let's talk. I'm going to bring it to you. What shortages you have in terms of resources in the newsroom, enabling you to do your job sufficiently and efficiently?
Well, at News 24, I think our subscription model has done a lot for us, and I can't talk about this enough, but our subscription model has allowed the investigative team to spend as much time as they need and as much resources as we need on our stories. Without our readers, we wouldn't be able to produce the content that we do. And I think in this day and age, if you want quality journalism, you're going to have to start paying for it. There is no doubt that our readers have enabled us to, for example, go on data gathering courses, data visualization courses, get interactive graphics into our articles, just create that readability of our articles where our readers can interact, and it's not just sort of static. But it's allowed us to also have certain protections. For example, I was sued by a Limpopo MMC. I think it was a year or 2 years ago, I think, for our reporting on the ESCOM files. Without our readers' subscriptions, we would not have been able to afford legal representation, and then the caliber of legal representation that was afforded to me, which I'm so thankful for. So I think, as I said, if you want quality journalism, you might have to start paying for it. But I understand that globally, not just in South Africa, newsrooms are struggling. And newsrooms are closing down. And there is, and the first thing to go, because time is money, is in-depth journalism. And I think that's a shame, because I think that spending time producing quality pieces brings in that readership that a newsroom might need.
I think certainly if you're at the SABC, the resource challenges where you have with the public broadcast. And I'm going to bring you in just a moment, though, to talk a little bit about how you're managing to do investigative pieces in an institution that is struggling so much. But just a moment, let's quickly hear from Tom, who's called in from Pretoria. Tom, good morning.
Good morning, Naledi and your guests. I just wanted to indicate that I was based in Mpumalanga as an investigative journalist for a community media sector. And I think that is the most vulnerable sector, because what happens immediately when you start writing investigative stories, there's advert bans, and there's also the issues of legal and lawsuits. So what one would say is that, and apart from that, there are issues of safety, of course, for the journalists in that level, that maybe in journalism schools we should start teaching new things, like how to be safe, that how to behave as a journalist, that we should no longer find ourselves in areas where we can become easy targets. But I must say that the sector is most vulnerable, and I think, and I wish more could be done at that level. That would be my input. Thank you very much.
I think there's no disagreeing with you there, Tom. Thank you so much for calling in, Tom. In Pretoria, there's people. Let me bring you in here and ask that very difficult question. I chuckle about it, but it is quite a serious issue, because you're doing a lot of work with very, very little. I mean, let's talk about the constraints that you're facing, what it is that you need for your work, and your ability to do your work to improve.
No, you're putting me in a very difficult situation.
I know.
No, look, it's just in terms of the resources, I'd say if we can get more quality cameras, hidden cameras, with a proper lifespan, battery lifespan, so that when we get to meet the perpetrators and whatnot, we know that we're risking, but we'll bring something visuals to work on instead of going there. Then the next thing you don't have visuals because spy cam or hidden camera failed you and whatnot. And also the process when you write a proposal, I think they need to be treated as special. Just the process of it being approved so that you go into these stories. I think that as well, if it can be looked at, they need to be treated special because we know that it's a quiet process for it to be approved. I think those are the things that I can, talk about in this moment. And So
I think that was very targeted. Well done. I think that what you're going to have is management responding, because that was a very direct answer. Thank you for that, Spiwe. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you, Spiwe Linda. I think we can let you go now because you've been on the line waiting for us for a very long time. But as we start to move towards wrapping it up, I think let me bring you in here, Ngulego. The shrinking size of investigative journalism in the country, on the continent. What needs to be done? What would you like to see?
Look, we need more good men and women in institutions where grants can be expanded, because there are good institutions that are, offering grants to investigative journalists, freelancers as well. We are in a digital age, and there are assumptions made that, because it's the digital age, you just post and the story is there. No, it's nothing like that. So we need more investment. Government, I think that there has to be a better understanding of what a public good means and why we need to protect that, as members of society. So those of us who can pay the TV licenses, for instance, those of us who can, subscribe to news publications, we need to do that. But governments as well need to start thinking differently, because if you look at Africa and the conversation we've been having in Africa, is South Africa becoming Zimbabwe? And, there are many linkages about, the collapse of states. Governments need to understand that they need the fourth estate to actually run better governments. The antagonistic relationship that, our media in South Africa and many media institutions around the world with their governments has to be changed. And for me, if we start thinking like that, members of society doing their bit to really say, look, we will pay for quality journalism, because it is quality journalism that has resulted in, we go to the elections today, the ANC is not sure of a majority, in
2024.
Yes, and that has come because of investigative journalism. Yeah,
I like the point that you made around the antagonistic relationship between investigative journalists and authorities needs to change, because it's counterproductive. It's essentially the message there is that if that relationship is antagonistic, we're taking ourselves backwards. Benin, I know that you haven't had a lot of time with us, but just before I let you go, what you're working on next, briefly if you can, what to look out for from you?
I am trying to do a series of stories. I think I may not reveal it now because of the sensitivity of the kind of stories. But I would just want to share something with you. So the gold mafia story, and even the Gupta story in South Africa, for instance, show that crime does not just have legs. It has wings as well. So, it's multilateral. You find crime, a crime that is committed in South Africa has tenterhooks in Dubai, in Europe, in the US, and so investigative journalism in Africa has to widen its reach as well. This can be through collaborations, this can be through innovations, in order to try to be able to keep up with the level of crime that's going on. Otherwise, we don't do that. We don't do a good job, and it's our countries, our people that suffer.
Yeah.
So while we are looking at doing today's story, we should be thinking ahead, trying to be ahead of the curve by saying, you know, what is going to be the nature or what is the nature of crime now, and how is it going to transition in the years to come.
Okay.
So media organizations should not be looking at themselves as individual entities. There should be a lot more collaboration. And I dare say there should also be a form of advocacy along about investigations, because just doing a story and then leaving it, you know, you've done an investigation and then you leave it at that.
It's not sufficient. Yeah, you need to follow up with authorities. I'm out of time, Bernard, but thank you so much for that. A good point that the work needs to be done. It needs to be finished by authorities, and we need to follow up on that as well. Azara, a brief 1 minute from you, maybe 30 seconds. What you're working on, if you can tell us at all.
Yep, I'm working on, I'm focusing on the city of Joburg, but expanding into investigating municipalities, because I really feel, I mean, I don't feel, but it's become very clear that it's sort of the new ground zero for corruption in South Africa. So looking into city of Joburg, my colleague Sibu Masondo is looking into eThekwini, and we will be expanding into other municipalities.
Stunning.
And in just 10 seconds, I completely agree with Benon. I don't think corruption happens in silos within countries, and Al Jazeera has definitely shown us, and there's definitely space for collaboration, because if we don't do that, we're missing a huge part of the puzzle. That can lead to a better, well-informed electorate.
100%. I look forward to seeing those pieces as well, because you're right. Municipalities certainly are struggling in Gauteng, but also in other parts of the country. Mr. Jas Abdulatif, before I let you go, quickly, what you're working on, what we can look out for?
Yeah, thank you very much. You realize that we've just concluded the general elections in Nigeria this year, whereby we have a president-elect and some new governors and lawmakers at the same time. And most of them, you'll be so surprised that most of them are living on stolen identities. What do I mean by stolen identities? Most of them doesn't have the certificates they claim they have. Because Nigeria is an environment whereby we give a lot of importance to certificates. So we're trying to evaluate how true is the certificate of even most of the elected political office holders that we have in Nigeria today, so that because we shouldn't be led by those that do not have even the quality of a leader.
That is going to be explosive. I look forward to seeing that. We hope that you'll come back and share it with the South African audiences as well here on Media and Society. Abdulatif, an absolute pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much to all our guest investigative journalists with News 24, Azara Karim, as well as Mr. Benin Oluka there from Uganda. He's, of course, the Africa editor of GIJN, as well as Spiwe Linda, SABC investigative journalism, a journalist, and Kulego Sbia as well, teaching fellow and PhD candidate at Wits University. That's how we wrap up Media and Society. Thank you so much for partaking as well. We'll catch up with you next week, Sunday, right here on SABC.